and I'm the Program Manager at the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Attendees, if you can hear me and if you can hear our speakers, please click the hand in the box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to raise your hands so that we can be sure the audience can hear us. And we're going to take a look and see all the hands going up. Thank you very much. Glad you could all be with us today. Before we get started with the webinar, I just want to go over a few administrative details about the functionality of the webinar software. If for some reason your computer or web browser freezes during the webinar, please reload the website and log back into the program. You should be able to rejoin the session. Please note that attendees will not be able to speak during the webinar. Though you won't be able to speak, you will have the ability to ask questions by entering them in the question box. If you have a problem during the webinar, you may enter it here. I'll monitor these questions and respond to you if I'm able. Questions pertaining to the presentation may be asked at any time in the question box, but will not be addressed until the end of the program, when we've built in about 20 minutes for a discussion period. Please feel free to ask those questions as we go along, and we'll get to them after the presentation. As an attendee, you have a control box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen that collapses and expands by clicking the double arrows. Also, when you exit the webinar, there will be a very brief survey that will pop up. We'd really appreciate your feedback on our performance. Following today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email. The email will include a link to a download of Principal Certificate of Attendance for 1.5 hours of instruction. If there are multiple attendees at your site, please forward this link to the other participants so that they can download and print the certificate with their name. The email will also include a link to the website where you can download a PDF copy of the slides from today's presentation. We'll also be posting a video archive of this presentation 1 to 2 weeks after the webinar. This webinar has been submitted to the AICP and has been approved for 1.5 CM credits. The Road Safety Academy, the training and education arm of the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, is a registered provider of CM credits. For more information on the Road Safety Academy, please visit www.rsa.unc.edu. For more information on future webinars or to view the archives from this webinar series and others, please visit www.walkinginfo.org/webinars. In addition to the webinars, PBIC offers 4 different in-person training courses to provide technical assistance to professionals and community members in developing pedestrian safety action plans and improving conditions for walking and bicycling. These courses can be found at walkinginfo.org/training. While our first presenter is getting set up with her presentation, I want to take a quick poll from the audience. Please let us know how many participants are viewing the webinar at your site. We'll give you all a couple of minutes to respond to the poll. Just a couple more seconds to cast your votes before we move on. All right, thank you very much for your feedback. I'd like to welcome and thank all of our presenters for agreeing to speak with us today. I'm going to turn it over to Leah Walton to kick things off with her presentation. Leah, please go ahead and take it from here.
Great, you can hear me?
A little louder if you could, but that sounds fine.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Dan, and thanks PBIC for inviting me to present today for this webinar. My name is Leah Walton. I am the Pedestrian Safety Program Manager for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration at headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to be sharing with you today about NHTSA's Pedestrian Safety Program Technical Assessment, giving the background of the program and what it involves. And then Trenda McPherson in Florida is going to share her experience with going through the process at the state level. So to start off, I'm going to give just a little background about the NHTSA Uniform Highway Safety Guidelines. And I'm not able to move forward. There we go. NHTSA's uniform guidelines for state highway safety programs were developed under Section 402 of Title 23 of the United States Code and requires the Secretary of Transportation to promulgate uniform guidelines for state highway safety programs. These guidelines offer direction to states in formulating their highway safety plans for highway safety efforts that are supported with Section 402 funds and other grant funds. 402 funds are distributed through the State Highway Safety Office. The guidelines provide a framework for developing a balanced highway safety program and serve as a tool with which states can assess the effectiveness of their own programs. NHTSA encourages states to use these guidelines and build upon them to optimize the effectiveness of highway safety programs conducted at the state and local levels. This is just an image of the pedestrian and bicycle safety uniform guidelines for highway safety programs. It's guideline number 14, and it is available online. It will be sent out either later with all the resources that Dan's going to provide. There are highway safety program guidelines for practically every program, ranging from motor vehicle registration to driver licensing to traffic records to accident investigation and reporting to debris hazard control and cleanup. Kind of spans the whole gamut of highway safety programs. I'm now going to start talking more about the technical assessment, which relates to the uniform guidelines for highway traffic safety. NHTSA developed technical assessments for certain highway safety programs based on those uniform guidelines for state highway safety programs. Assessments are a cooperative effort among NHTSA, the State Highway Safety Office, and other agencies or offices such as the Department of Transportation, Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Education, and other state partners which contribute to pedestrian safety efforts in the state. The assessment process provides an unbiased examination and overview of the pedestrian program's current status in comparison to the pre-established standards, which are the uniform guidelines. The assessment notes the program's strengths and weaknesses, provides recommendations for improvement, and the final product, which is a report. It's not a NHTSA report. NHTSA facilitates the process, but the report is a consensus of recommendations prepared by non-government team members of subject matter experts. The technical assessment program offers states a tool to use over time to review their state highway safety programs, note the program's strengths and accomplishments, and note where improvements can be made. The assessment can be used as a management tool for planning purposes and for making decisions about how to best use available resources. The program technical assessment process provides an organized approach for meeting these objectives. And the assessment is based on those uniform guidelines for state highway safety programs. NHTSA has a variety of program assessments. The first highway safety program assessment was in 1988 in Virginia for the Emergency Medical Services Program. Since then, assessments for motorcycles, traffic records, occupant protection, standard field sobriety testing, impaired driving, and pedestrians have been developed and implemented. I mentioned before that there are uniform guidelines for lots of highway safety programs, but not all programs receive assessments. The traffic records assessment and the occupant protection assessments are mandatory in every state every 5 years. The first state pedestrian safety program technical assessment was held in Nevada in 2008, and the second pedestrian assessment was held in Florida in 2012. In the Highway Safety Program Guideline 14 for pedestrians and bicycle safety, there's a comprehensive highway system that is the most effective means for producing consistent long-term changes in knowledge and behavior necessary to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety. The following components create a structure for identifying problem areas, implementing, measuring, and evaluating problem areas, and directing the results back into system improvements. NHTSA has identified these elements to effectively address the pedestrian and bicycle safety problem. It includes program management, multidisciplinary involvement, legislation, regulation, and policy, law enforcement, highway and traffic engineering, a communications program, an outreach program, driver education and licensing, and an evaluation program. The Pedestrian and Bicycle Uniform Guideline is the only NHTSA guideline that involves highway and traffic and a highway and traffic engineering component. I'm going to take you through the process of an assessment, and this is just kind of a breakdown from start to finish, which takes between 4 to 6 months from the initial request. For the initial request, a state official, most often from the State Highway Safety Office, will send a request for an assessment through its NHTSA regional administrator. The regional administrator is responsible for forwarding the request to the Regional Operations and Program Delivery Office at NHTSA headquarters, and then the Regional Operations and Program Delivery Office forwards the request directly to the appropriate NHTSA program office. There's then a pre-assessment site visit. Headquarters staff is responsible for arranging and conducting the pre-assessment site meeting with the state and for coordinating with the designated regional office to ensure a collaborative effort. On-site pre-assessment meetings are most effective, but depending on the situation in the program area and the discretion of NHTSA, there could be a pre-assessment conference call instead of an on-site meeting. And under certain circumstances, NHTSA headquarter program staff may delegate the pre-site meeting to the regional staff. So far with pedestrian assessments, we have not done that. We've involved the regional staff in the pre-site assessment, and someone from headquarters has attended the pre-site meeting. At the pre-site meeting, a few things are covered. We discuss the assessment dates or potential dates based on the staff and team availability, review NHTSA's roles, the state's roles, and the region's roles in the process, identify state-specific issues to be addressed during the assessment if there's anything in particular that the state wants focused on, identify any appropriate special team expertise, reviewing logistical issues including the facility that'll be conducive to conducting the assessment, cost, equipment, travel, lodging, and all of those logistical requirements. Emphasizes the importance of having the assessment include the proper presenters for testimony, reviewing assessment ground rules, including opening briefings and the need for privacy during the team deliberations, informing the state that the final report is a consensus-based document of the team members. Neither NHTSA nor the state is involved in approving recommendations, reviewing the team's briefing package content and going over what that involves, and how much time it needs to be sent to the team prior to the assessment, and then informing the state that the assessment report is a public document and is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. After the pre-site visit, the headquarters and regional staff sets to work on doing some planning, and the state itself begins planning their testimonies and folks to involve. The headquarters program staff is in close coordination with the regional staff, selects the assessment team with demonstrated national program expertise and specialized expertise to address the state's unique needs. I should say here that the subject matter experts of the team cannot be from the state where the assessment is taking place. Again, I mentioned before, it needs to be an unbiased, objective look at what's going on in the state, and so we select folks that are from out of state to participate as subject matter experts. The headquarters staff also selects an administrative consultant that is familiar with the process and can keep the report writing process moving. And in the meantime, the state is busy working on developing the briefing book, which Trenda is going to address a little bit later. Once everyone is on site, the assessment kicks off on a Monday morning, And between Monday morning and Wednesday at noon, there is a very tight schedule of different testimonies going on where the expert team is listening to these testimonies, asking a lot of questions, collecting data, and formulating their thoughts about the status of the pedestrian safety program in that state. On Wednesday at noon, the expert team sequesters themselves and begins deliberations and writing of a report. By Friday morning, the team has then produced a report, a draft report, that is then presented to the state, and the state is then given 2 weeks to review the technical aspect of the report. They can provide technical corrections to NHTSA to be made, and following those 2 weeks of their time to review the report, NHTSA then is given 30 days to finalize the report and send back the state the final report. Benefits of the assessment include it provides an opportunity for an open and non-threatening dialogue between the host office, which again is most often the State Highway Safety Office, and its customers. It provides an opportunity for long-range planning with the report. It can also assist with resource allocation. Once the report is handed over, the state can then take that to their funding source and say, this is what subject matter experts from across the country has identified as ways that we can improve our pedestrian safety program, and here's our plan to go about it. It, again, identifies the strengths and weaknesses and then opportunities for improvement. It generates the administrative and political support for program improvement, and it serves as a benchmark against which to measure future improvements. I posted a map of the NHTSA regional offices in case you're unsure of where your NHTSA regional office is located. And you can just kind of take note of where you are located. If you need to contact your regional office, you can connect with them through NHTSA.gov and find their contact information. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the NHTSA pedestrian team of subject matter experts and what their role is, because I know a lot of folks out there have been involved in pedestrian safety for a long time, and you too could be a subject matter expert on an assessment if you're interested. The duties involved in being on an assessment team is to review the state's background information in their briefing book prior to arrival. It's a lot of information. It's very big. These days we send them out on thumb drives. It's got a lot of the history of what's been going on in the state for pedestrian safety, maps, etc. They attend the assessment team briefing, which is prior to the assessment, and takes the lead during their interviews and the team discussions. Each subject matter area is designated one or two of those program areas that they're an expert in, be it program management, highway and traffic engineering, outreach, etc. And they, at that point of the interviews, kind of takes the lead as the subject matter expert. They then synthesize their information and develop recommendations and participates in writing the draft final report. And then they participate in the review and edit sessions to ensure that there is a consensus in the report that's being produced. And I'm not going to lie, that can go late into the evening because we are producing this draft report in basically a matter of 2.5 to 3 days. And then finally, they participate in the final briefing to summarize the report on Friday morning. After the assessment, the week of the assessment is over, there may be a few conference calls with NHTSA headquarters to discuss any edits that have been brought to light based on the state's review. But once the report is final, that is pretty much the end of the participation in the assessment until the next one. With that, That's my presentation. If you're interested in being a subject matter expert for an assessment, we're always collecting more names and contacts, so I'm totally open to getting your information and talking to you more about it. If you're interested in receiving an assessment in your state, I encourage you to talk to your state highway safety office, find out if they have any plans to do any sort of assessment like this. I will say that at this point there are no pedestrian assessments planned on our books at this point, but that's always subject to change. And with that, I'll finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. I really appreciate that. And we'll put Leah's contact information back up on the screen toward the end of the presentation when we have our Q&A session. But right now what I'm going to do is shift things over to Trinda McPherson. Trinda works with the Florida Department of Transportation, and she is going to talk a little bit about Florida's assessment and what they've been doing with the findings. So Trinda, whenever you're ready, please take it from here.
Okay. Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about Florida's pedestrian and bicycle focused initiative. I am the State Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Program Manager for Florida Department of Transportation. And the purpose, the reason that Florida actually has a focused initiative for pedestrian and bicycle safety is to increase awareness. We have many different diverse types of road users in Florida, and it's very important to us that we maintain the safety of all of those road users, including our pedestrians and bicyclists. So our vision in Florida is to provide a safe transportation system. And our mission is to provide that through utilization of a comprehensive approach. We want to improve pedestrian mobility and safety, and we want to do that through an innovative approach through delivering this program more effectively in order to improve the overall safety of our pedestrians and bicyclists. So we began taking a look at our problem in 2011, and part of our problem identification was initially to take a look at our top 10 high priority counties. Where is our problem most frequently occurring, and how can we initially address it most effectively? And so we did identify that Hillsborough, Pinellas, Polk, Lee, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, Volusia, Orange, and Duval were the areas in which we were seeing the most fatal crashes involving pedestrians. And as you can see, those are all highlighted in red on the map. Then we took a look at what was contributing to the problem. And these are just some examples of some contributing factors that we found as we were identifying our problem. Land development patterns. Sometimes the patterns are not developed so that it's very easy for a pedestrian or bicyclist to navigate from one location to another. Separated land use. As you can see, there's an expressway between residential sections and retail sections in some areas, which is difficult or impossible sometimes to for pedestrians and bicyclists to get to their destination. Sometimes the school board policy is to place schools in rural areas along state highways, and we're finding that we have seen a serious decline in the number of students that can walk and bike to school. Land development regulations. They're not always The regulations for development are not always beneficial to safely traveling to school. And then there's speed. We are aware that if a pedestrian is struck by an automobile going 20 miles an hour, there will be some injury. 30 miles an hour, serious injury, and typically at 40 miles an hour and up is a fatality. And so we did take the speed into consideration. And we looked at things like what influences a driver's speed. Sometimes it's the road geometrics. Sometimes it's lane width. adjacent land use or development. Sometimes it's simply traffic volume and it's not allowing for presence of pedestrians and bicyclists. And then we looked at the problem of driver expectation. When does a driver expect a pedestrian or bicyclist to be on the roadway, and how do they react once they do see a pedestrian or bicyclist there? And if you're going, at a very high rate of speed, you may not even notice that there is a pedestrian or bicyclist on the roadway. So definitely your expectation is down as a driver. And then there's pedestrian activity. This is a photo that we took last month in Daytona around Speed Weeks. And as you can see, well, you can't see in this photograph, but the light was red. Although there are so many pedestrians crossing that even when the light turned to green, the roadway was still just filled with a cluster of pedestrians. So we do have a lot of events in Florida, and we do have a lot of opportunity to take a look at how to better manage pedestrian flows in these types of situations. So we began by assessing the situation. We, as Leah mentioned, submitted a request to our regional administrator, and we briefly explained to them what was going on in Florida. We ranked above the national average, and we really thought it was time for us to assess the situation and determine how we could best make some safety improvements. Following the request, NHTSA did contact us to discuss briefing and scheduling. We were asked to prepare a briefing book for the team, and the briefing book is really just what I've been talking about. It's problem identification. In the briefing materials, we provided graphs and charts and information on the problem. We provided countermeasures that were being implemented in different areas of Florida and different partners that were working towards some of those countermeasures. We included crash trends, crash factors, even economic impact and type of injuries, demographics. It's important, of course, to speak to each emphasis area during the assessment, and so we're really in the briefing book trying to identify, a multidisciplinary problem or situation so that they could assist us in making recommendations for problem resolution. So during the assessment, what you can expect is the team will come in and meet with the management staff, and they'll talk about what their expectations are. You will actually schedule interviews with folks across your state that are implementing positive countermeasures, and those people will actually come in and be interviewed by the panel of experts who will then use that information to develop a comprehensive report of recommendations. Once you're delivered that draft report of recommendations, you are given an opportunity to respond or make any technical corrections that might need to be made there. These are just a couple of photos of the actual assessment, and as you can see, in the top left are our interviewees. Those are folks that were being asked questions on some implementations or some countermeasures. The photo at the top right is our panel of experts. The photo at the bottom left were our NHTSA and Federal Highway representatives, and this is kind of unique in that typically we don't join NHTSA and Federal Highway whenever we're doing an assessment, but we thought it was important, given the situation that we have in Florida, that we include both of our federal partners to play a role in this assessment. And then to the right, the bottom right, is our management team that was here discussing with the panel of experts, I believe at this point, was their findings. And I guess the bottom picture on the right was just to say it's not so scary after all. It really is a very rewarding experience. It does take a lot of work. It does take a lot of time and effort, but it is very much worth it in the end, and it has really assisted us in looking at things more comprehensively. So the final technical report, when you receive that, will begin with priority recommendations. So those should be given the most weight. And the report is your guide, so keep in mind that an assessment is not an evaluation. It's not where they're going to come in and tell you what you're doing wrong or what you're doing right. It's where they're just going to come in and make some recommendations that can help you. They're valuable tools that can help you in implementing a successful program. And these are just some examples of our priority recommendations. I do believe that Dan is going to put a copy of the Florida assessment on the site for you to download afterwards. And of course, if you have any questions or comments in reference to that and you'd like to contact me later, I'll be giving you, or he'll also be giving you my contact information. We followed our assessment with training, and the reason we did that is because our focused initiative team is a very diverse group. They're very multidisciplinary, and everybody is somewhat of an expert in their own area, but not too many of us were really able to look across the 4 E's. And it was valuable to us to be able to think outside our own box and to think more comprehensively. So NHTSA provides a training called Pedestrian 101, and in Pedestrian 101 it really helps you to be able to think about how everything fits together, how you can build it, but if you don't educate and enforce, they may not use it well, and how if you don't educate and enforce, there may be more injuries requiring responses from EMS. So it's very important that we build or we engineer, that we educate on how to use that effectively, that we enforce and make sure that people's behaviors are modified and that they are using it as instructed, and then to follow up with EMS and make sure that they're very proactive. EMS is usually a reactive agency, so helping them to understand the types of injuries that may occur in these types of crashes, and then helping them to be prepared to respond to those types of crashes is very valuable. So these are some photos of PED 101, and in the center are our instructors. And as you see again, we have NHTSA and Federal Highway there. The other 4 photos are our team, and you can see Kathy Neal's excitement when she received her certificate that she completed the course. This was a very effective experience for all of us, no matter what our emphasis was. It really did give us an opportunity to broaden those ideas and those horizons. Our next step was to develop a campaign and to come up with a pilot area in which we could implement that campaign and study it and make sure that we were reaching our target audience. So we collected baseline data in June and July of 2012, and we did that through observational and public opinion surveys. One approach was to ask the public what they know about pedestrian-related laws, and the second was to observe what they're really doing, because sometimes what they tell you and what they're doing don't exactly match up. So we needed to be able to understand what our margin of error was and to be able to understand in actuality what's going on. So we conducted these in 34 sites in Miami-Dade and 20 sites in Hillsborough County. The public opinion survey was conducted in person with interviews from pedestrians and then online with drivers. So our baseline findings are that approximately 2/3 of our road users are aware of which direction they should travel, and that's walking or biking. Now in Florida you can bike on the sidewalk, and when you bike on the sidewalk you bike against traffic, you bike with the direction of the pedestrians, and when you bike on the roadway you bike in the direction of travel where the motorists are traveling. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back one. Hillsborough County users, we found, had a better understanding of the law than Miami-Dade, and that was pertaining to crossing the streets. Approximately 80% of our road users are aware of the correct time to cross an intersection and at a signalized intersection. Higher percentages of Hillsborough users had some understanding of jaywalking or crossing where there's not a mid-block crossing opportunity. And what we're finding that with our pedestrians, we were about half and half, a few more males than females, and that's with pedestrians. With bicyclists, we're seeing a lot more males than females, and we're just trying to determine who our target audience needed to be. So again, our number of sites in Hillsborough and Miami-Dade were 34 and 20. Our number of users that we observed was 1,575 in Hillsborough and 4,084 in Miami. What we really found was that about 96% of our bicyclists didn't use helmets in Hillsborough and about 86% in Miami. We found that bicyclists 90% of the time in Hillsborough did not have lights and 89% in Miami, which is still very close. We found about a fourth of our bicyclists riding against traffic on the roadway. We found 27% in Hillsborough and 20% in Miami were not using a crosswalk, not crossing on a crosswalk. And then we found about 44.5% of vehicles not yielding to peds or bikes. So once we had completed our baseline survey, we conducted a media buy, and we bought billboards, outside transit buses, internal transit buses. We prepared tip cards, T-shirts, wristbands, advertisements on bus shelters. We had web banners, and we developed our alerttodayflorida.com website. And we placed these in Hillsborough and Miami-Dade for a period of 4 weeks so that we could study this pilot and see if we were reaching our intended audience. These are some examples of the billboard advertisements, and as you can see, we did those in both Spanish and English. I will tell you that one important factor is that when we developed, we did not develop in English and translate to Spanish. We actually developed in Spanish and developed in English. We find that you get a purer translation that way. Our transit advertisements, on the top left, you can see that's a side of a transit bus. On the right-hand top is internal inside the bus, and we had these banners internal, and we had handouts, tip cards inside the buses. And the bottom two slides are actually bus shelter advertisements in English and Spanish, and those were both, I believe, in the Miami area. Our television PSA, I'm going to play that for you really quick.
Safety doesn't happen by accident. Alert today, alive tomorrow.
The really important message that we were trying to get across in this advertisement was that it can be a comedy of errors. It can be the pedestrian not paying attention and stepping into the crosswalk once the countdown has ended. It can be the driver, lack of attention, failing to stop before turning right on red. There can be a lot of things that contribute to pedestrian fatalities, crashes and fatalities, and our goal is to just make people aware that you really should learn the rules and follow the rules. People don't like to really be preached to about laws, and so we thought rules was a kinder, gentler word to be able to get that message across to them. We also did internal bus advertisements and tip cards. This is the English version here. The top is the one side and the bottom is the back side. And again, we're reinforcing those rules. Always use the crosswalk, stop before turning right on red, look before crossing, and yield to pedestrians. And as we were focusing on the problem, we determined that motorists who most commonly crash with our pedestrians are our drivers age 65 and older. And you know, that could be cognitive problems, it could be vision, it could be many different things. And then our second demographic was drivers age 20 to 25, and they're more likely to be distracted or maybe even speeding or impaired. And so in response to our aging road users and to our driver distraction and speeding, we're developing PSAs that are directed towards those behaviors. Now I'm going to play for you one PSA that is developed specifically for our target audience of 65 and older, and I do want you to know that as we're developing these media, creative designs, we are focus group testing them. We're utilizing people within the demographic in which we're trying to reach, and we're making sure that they fully understand, comprehend, and that they respond that they would be likely to change their behavior and share this information were it presented to them. So here's the radio PSA.
History code RADIO CSG QZ7 F. Change 30 seconds.
As drivers, our surroundings are constantly changing. Like, when did this lane become a bike lane? And why can't I turn right on red here? And not just change, we have distractions too. Cute ones, but nevertheless distractions. So it's important to always pay attention, especially around crosswalks. 1 in 4 traffic fatalities involve a pedestrian. Smart enough to know that safety doesn't happen by accident.
Alert today, alive tomorrow. A message from the Florida Department of Transportation.
So when we focus tested this, we did English and Spanish because we're looking at both demographics in Florida. And we found about 96% gave us a favorable opinion for English, and about 92% gave us a favorable opinion in Spanish. We did have about 9 different creatives that we tested, and this was definitely the highest ranking creative design that we presented. 60% of pedestrians and 27% of motorists said they were definitely likely to change their behavior as a result of hearing this message. So a next step to focusing on the problem is looking at pedestrians. So we took a 3-year sample, and we often even use 5- and 10-year samples so that we can make sure that we're getting, our target audience. More pedestrians aged 65 and up were fatally injured in pedestrian crashes than any other group. So while we're seeing that demographic of motorists is more commonly involved in crashes with pedestrians, we're also seeing that they're more commonly hit by motorists. This group was followed by pedestrians ages 45 to 54. And the largest increase in pedestrian fatalities during that time period was 65 and up, and that increased 11% during that 3-year period. The largest overall decrease that we saw during that 3-year period was 45 to 54-year-olds. However, they still ranked number 2. Another problem we're focusing on is impairment. And impaired driving or impaired drivers that conflict with pedestrians in Florida seems to be a problem for us in our high priority area. So we're in the process of developing television PSAs. We're considering future development of radio PSAs, billboards, print materials, and promotional items. We're still in our early stages. At this point, we have focus tested and identified our public service announcement, and we are working with law enforcement on our enforcement plan, and this campaign is scheduled to be rolled out in the next month. We also went around the state to get input from our partners. We conducted a series of roundtable meetings that were facilitated by Secretary Hadaway. Secretary Hadaway is our state champion for pedestrian and bicycle safety. We went to Tampa, to Bartow, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, DeLand, and Jacksonville, and these 6 areas allowed us to cover all of our top 10 high priority areas that I showed you on the map earlier. By facilitating these discussions, we were able to get input from all of our local partners on their grassroots efforts and what recommendations they had for countermeasures that might work in their areas. These are some photos from some of those meetings. And then we took it a next step. We took the assessment recommendations, we took the roundtable input that we received, and we began strategic planning. So we're currently using all of those recommendations as well as taking into consideration our vulnerable road user strategies in our strategic highway safety plan and our other road user strategies in our aging road user strategic safety plan. And those 2 plans are very valuable to us in that they already address very specific issues that are important to us in this initiative. And we're using all of those to develop Florida's first pedestrian strategic safety plan. Now, the draft plan was completed January 31st, 2013, and it's being finalized next week. We have also implemented Florida's first Pedestrian Safety Coalition, and this coalition is a group of partners that's charged with implementation of the strategic plan. We conducted our first meeting February 12th through 13th in Tampa, and our initial steps were to identify our emphasis area teams and to develop our business plan. We have subsequently followed up with mid-quarter conference calls, actually earlier this week, and in those conference calls we're finalizing our performance indicators and our strategies to complete or implement the business plan. And the business plan is simply just everything that's in the strategic pedestrian and bicycle strategic safety plan. It's all laid out in the business plan so that we can go from objective to strategy to task to timeline for implementation. And that really does help us keep that team motivated and gives the team direction so that they can consistently all move forward in one common direction. We're also conducting pedestrian road safety audits throughout the state. Now, last week in Jacksonville, we conducted our first pedestrian road safety audit, and this is a train-the-trainer session. We had about 30 participants, and we did actually go out and evaluate a site. It was a very effective training. We'll be doing another one in March 27th and 28th in Orlando, and our last one will be April 3rd and 4th in Miami. These centralized sessions allow statewide benefits, statewide participation, and our participants include partners such as law enforcement, pedestrian safety coalition members, public works departments. Lots of different folks were given an opportunity, people from design, people from traffic operations. So not just your typical engineering group, but a lot of different diverse participants had an opportunity to participate in this training. And these are some photos of our training. And in the middle, the top three were our instructors, and the bottom two are our management team here at DOT for the Pedestrian Focused Initiative. On the top left, you'll see where the class is preparing to go out and do the site monitoring. On the bottom left, you'll see where they're actually out on site evaluating. On the top right and bottom right, you'll see where they're actually reporting out on what their findings were. We actually went through how to initiate the evaluation. We actually conducted the evaluation, and then we gave follow-up on what our recommendations are. And again, we're looking at low-cost countermeasures, but specific to pedestrians and bicyclists, which are often missed or not considered as strongly in standard road safety audits. And that is all I have for today, so I'm going to turn this back over to Dan.
Thanks very much, Trinda. I appreciate that. It was a great presentation, and we have now plenty of time for some questions and answers and discussion. So I want to go ahead and get started by first answering a couple of questions, clearing up a couple of things that came up a few times in the comments, just about some of the follow-up materials. We are going to be including, and I think Trinda and Leah both mentioned this, in the email that you receive after the webinar, in addition to having information about where you can download your certificate of attendance and view the presentation slides, that page is also going to have a link to both NHTSA's uniform guidelines for pedestrians that talk a little bit about their program side, what goes into the assessments there, as well as a link to download Florida's final technical assessment report. So you will have access to that information as well as the presentation slides. On that same page is where we're going to be posting the webinar archive. And that'll be about 1 to 2 weeks after the webinar date. So just so everyone knows, that information will be accessible. I want to talk next just a quick point about Pedestrian PED 101, the training course. There were quite a few questions that came in about that, how that people can take that course and training and get involved with that. And I want to turn it over to Leah really quickly just to mention a note that she sent me during the webinar.
Yeah, we will be delivering a web-based version of PED 101 in July, and we did have a course that was going to take place in April, but we have to postpone that one, and that would be a classroom course. If your state is interested in hosting a PED 101 course like what we did in Florida, that's definitely a possibility. We can get that arranged through the Transportation Safety Institute. In going about that, you need to contact your state highway safety office and the regional, or actually, I'm sorry, contact the regional office, the NHTSA regional office, and ask about getting signed up for those classes. And you can kind of proceed from there. But I don't have the dates for the web-based course on me right now, but I will send that to Dan shortly after this, and hopefully it can go out in the follow-up email that will be sent out this afternoon.
Great, thanks, Lee. And yeah, we'll put it in there, and then we'll also update the archive page with that information too. So hopefully we'll be able to get all that information to you all. The first question that came up, and it came up a few times, was just about the overall cost of the assessment. Things like time commitments involved on the part of the agency that's having the assessment done, as well as some of the more specific things, that the time commitments to gather materials together. It especially seemed like Trinda, coming up with the briefing book materials must have taken a good bit of time to get all that information in one place. So can you all talk a little bit about some of the costs involved and what agencies can expect from that end?
Sure. This is Trinda, and I'll take that question. It ranges between about $35,000 and $40,000 total for an assessment, and that is everything included. That's from preparation of the materials to reserving the site for the actual assessment to be conducted. That includes paying the panel of experts. It includes everything, including, for them to travel in and what have you. So I'd say between $35,000 and $40,000. It does take a considerable amount of time. In Florida, we use a 402 grant to support a comprehensive pedestrian safety program, and that grant is awarded to a university, a state university. And the team at the state university really did most of the briefing material preparation. I simply directed those plans for preparation and approved and made sure that the materials were correct. So I would say that timing on the department of, or the side of the highway safety office, it probably took me, I'd say I might have spent a total of about a month of my own time preparing for the assessment. My team probably spent more time than I did in putting gathering those materials and putting those materials together. But I will tell you that amount of time that it takes is so worth it, considering that there's no way that we could have come up with the multidisciplinary approach to resolving the problem on our own.
Great, thank you.
Can I add something about the
cost? Yes, absolutely.
If a state wants to host the meeting, the actual testimony room and everything, if they want to host it in a government facility, that cuts down the cost. As you saw in the photos of Trinda's presentation, we were in a hotel, so that required a rental of a conference room in a hotel and all the stuff that goes along with it. But there needs to be the facility. If it is going to be housed in a government facility, that would be free of charge. It needs to be very close to a hotel that the team can get back and forth to very easily, because they will need to have access to their sleeping quarters pretty easily, etc. But that's just that's one way that you can cut down on the cost.
Okay, great. And a question about the different assessments. All of this is focused on the obviously the state level assessments that NHTSA has been doing. And if a local agency is interested in being assessed or looking at their programs, clearly that's probably not something that NHTSA would do. But Trinda, in your experience with working with your local agencies after your assessment is done, is that something that you've seen communities in your state want to do, is sort of replicate that assessment on a local level?
We've not actually been asked to replicate the pedestrian program assessment on a local level, but we are working with many of our locals to develop their own pedestrian safety action plans, and Federal Highway really has some good guidelines that you can use to develop your own plan. And as a focused initiative and as the coalition, we're certainly planning to reach out to areas who haven't initiated a plan yet to see if we can work with them to assist them in making that happen.
Okay. I have a question about the, sorry, I lost it. Oh, so you mentioned that the results of the assessment, Leah mentioned that the results are, once the assessment's done, that's public information that is made available. There might be agencies out there that are interested in having an assessment done, but might, may want to keep the assessment to themselves. I want to ask if Trinda, did that ever give you all reservations about participating, or did you know right off the bat that you all were very comfortable, having that assessment done and then it being public information for anyone else to see? Did that ever come up?
Well, because this wasn't our first assessment, when I participated in the motorcycle program assessment back in 2008, and we did have a lot of controversy at the time around motorcycle safety in Florida. We had the helmet law had been repealed and what have you. And so we did keep that a little bit more under wraps. I mean, it is public record, but we didn't just put it out there for the world to see. And we felt comfortable because of what was going on in that arena at that time. With our pedestrian program assessment, we have such a big problem in Florida that we felt very comfortable putting the assessment recommendations out because we wanted people to take a look at it and see, what we were doing and that we are making progress and identifying that we have a problem that needs to be addressed.
And this is Leah. I just want to clarify. NHTSA, if we're given a request to see an assessment report, we don't just automatically send it out. We contact the state, and it would have to go through the state. It's like I said before, it's not a NHTSA report, but since NHTSA is involved in facilitating and organizing it, a lot of states come to us asking for those reports, but we go directly to the state to ask for them.
Okay, thank you. This question is for Trinda. How did you go about, and you mentioned some of this, but if you could talk again about how you went about selecting your panelists and participants for the meeting, for the assessment, the sort of individuals that were included there, sort of what their backgrounds were, why they were selected, and maybe talk a little bit about whether you considered individuals who might not be so familiar with the pedestrian bicycle issues, but might come from other fields such as transit or public health or some of the other issues that might impact ped bike, but may not be typically involved in ped bike projects.
That's a really good question. We initially looked at folks that we had given sub-grants to over the past 8 or 10 years for pedestrian and bicycle emphasis. We then started looking around our state and seeing who our partners were who were implementing countermeasures even without receiving highway safety grant funds. Lastly, we did reach out to our health departments, to our transit agency, even to our public information office. Even though these folks were not currently working within the pedestrian and bicycle safety field, they really had a lot to offer, a lot of valuable input on countermeasures that we could implement. And so we didn't just look at people who were doing something, we looked at people who could be potentially become partners and help us in our effort.
Great, thank you very much. I have a question for Leah. When you talked about, or it was Trinda talked about the report and how the recommendations come back sort of prioritized. Yeah, I just had a question about how are the priorities determined, kind of what goes into that process, and what do you use to kind of pull out some of those higher priority items for the agencies to look at?
Sure. Well, again, it's all the subject matter experts. It has nothing to do with what NHTSA thinks, but essentially, you know, after all of the interviews and deliberations, oftentimes the team will realize through the interviews that there is a big gap missing, that there's a big piece of a program that's just not as strong as it really could be. And something that they've seen in their experience that is really important to have a successful and strong pedestrian safety program. And that's kind of how those recommendations get to be priority. They are, you know, they're constantly reviewing all the information that they've received and kind of coming up with their status and recommendations. And based on that, they all sit down together and go through recommendations that they have come up with, and they decide as a team, as a consensus, what really should be focused on immediately to make some sort of impact. And all the recommendations are very important, but some are things that are just glaringly clear. This really needs to happen to make some sort of improvement right away.
Great, thank you. A question came in. You talked a little bit, Trent, at the early part of your presentation about land use and some of the land use issues that you noticed when you were kind of giving that first over analysis of some of the issues. Have there been any outcomes from the report that specifically led to any sort of policy changes on the land use side to address safety?
Not yet. We are in the process. Our draft strategic plan has been completed, and we're looking at finalizing that in the next week. And in that plan, one component is legislation, regulation, and policy. In Florida, we do have a Bike Ped Partnership Council that we're working with, and the council includes members of many local agencies, and also some judiciary are involved in that team. So we've got lots of opportunity to work with our law enforcement, our judiciary, to come up with recommendations for policy changes. We've not implemented any yet, but we definitely have identified some areas that we could improve, and we will be advancing on that over the next year.
Okay, thank you. And for Trinda, again, have any of the assessment findings been compared to or sort of related to any Safe Routes to School program needs, and have the assessment findings kind of led to any improvement specifically for children going to and from school?
Absolutely. As I talked about in some of the land use, you know, we're building more and more schools in rural areas. It's challenging to have children walk to school. It's challenging to make sure that there are facilities that support safe walking and biking to school, so we're definitely working very closely with our Safe Routes to School program. In my capacity, the Safe Routes to School program works in my office. The manager works in my office, and we work very closely together. We do have some initiatives or some strategies in our strategic plan that are directly Safe Routes to School oriented, and we're thinking outside of the box. For example, traditional Safe Routes to School projects only went up to 8th grade. Now that Safe Routes to School funding specifically is going away for us, we're looking at other opportunities under Highway Safety Improvement Plan to continue that and to strengthen it by reaching out even to our high schools and to our older students. So we definitely are working in that direction. Again, we're just getting to the point where we're finalizing that plan, so we have not actually began the implementation on those countermeasures yet, but they're definitely on our radar and are part of our plan.
Thank you. You showed a map of your high priority counties based on, I think you said it was based on fatality numbers, and a couple of people were just curious if you also looked at the injury numbers and if those kind of overlapped, if the highest fatality counties were also the focus areas for in terms of injury numbers, or did you see any differences there?
Actually, our top 10 high priority counties are based on fatalities, but they're also our high priority counties for serious injury. They're also our highest population counties, and they cross over with other vulnerable road users that are spelled out in our strategic highway safety plan. So we really are seeing that those are areas that really warrant emphasizing.
And were those the locations where the education and media campaigns were focused, or were those sort of done statewide?
So far, the education and media campaign was piloted in Miami and Hillsborough County. Once we got our end results for those pilots, then we massaged it somewhat and began rolling it out in the other 8 high-priority counties in January. So in January, we reached out to Broward and Palm Beach counties. In February, we rolled out in Volusia County. We're very excited about that opportunity because that's Speed Weeks in Volusia County, and we saw a big spike in pedestrian crashes, fatalities, and injuries during Speed Weeks each year as we've moved forward looking at a 10-year trend. So far this year, our response from our Highway Patrol has been that there were 0 pedestrian crashes, fatalities, or injuries as a result of that or during that period in which we rolled out in Volusia County, so we're pretty excited about that. We rolled out just last week in Duval County. We were rolling out in 2 weeks in both Polk and Pinellas County, and then we'll be rolling out in Lee County in May. And I'm sorry I missed Orange County. We're rolling out in Orange County on Monday. So those are our top 10 areas. Will all have been covered. Our post-evaluation for the first year, our goal was to increase awareness by 5%. Our post-evaluation will be conducted at the end of June 2013. We feel pretty confident that we've reached our goal, which is increasing awareness. Our next goal is to reduce fatalities by 5% annually, and we look forward to being able to incorporate other countermeasures with our media campaign and enforcement plans to make that change happen as well.
Great, thank you. Quite a few questions came in about specifically about the campaign and sort of the different costs, or the cost of the campaign, and then the sort of different funding sources that you're using to support that campaign. If you could talk about that a bit. Sure.
I don't know what the specific questions are about the campaign, but I will tell you that the initial rollout in Miami and Hillsborough County for production and the media buy there was a little less than $300,000. The rollout for the remaining 8 campaigns for all of our media buy completely was a little less than $800,000. We are using lots of different resources. For example, the impaired driver component, addressing impaired drivers that are impacting pedestrians. That grant is Section 410 funds, which is very specific, and we're being very careful in how we're using that because it has very specific requirements. That one is $400,000, and it requires us to directly reach impaired drivers and to have an enforcement plan in conjunction with the media plan to make sure that we're not just educating but are enforcing. So that one has been somewhat of a pilot in itself. We do have some legislative funding that will be coming in beginning in July 1st. We asked for an additional $3 million in communications funds and an additional $1.5 million in enforcement, high visibility enforcement funding, and that has been approved. So we are using lots of different resources. The Comprehensive Pedestrian Safety Program, the grant, for that funding, which is all of our support staff and purchasing our materials and creating or developing or refining or focus testing everything that we're doing, that project runs about $400,000 per year, and that's funded out of Section 402 Highway Safety Grant funds.
Thank you very much. I think that answered all the questions that came in about the cost, I believe. So that was very comprehensive. Thank you. I want to talk or ask you a bit about the survey instrument that you used. You talked a little bit about some of the things you learned about motorists, bicyclists, pedestrians, in terms of behaviors and things. Can you talk about the survey instrument that you used, and is that something that that you've made available, or is that something that you could recommend other states might use?
It's something that we developed under our comprehensive program. We would certainly be willing to share those instruments with other states, absolutely. One instrument is an online survey that specifically targets motorists, and it asks them about their behavior. Do you stop before you turn right on red? It asks them questions. In Florida, you must yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk unless it is marked as stop. And if it's marked as stop, then you stop until the pedestrian completely exits the crosswalk. And so we ask them things like that. Do you know what this law means? And what do you commonly do? Another one was for bicyclists, because a lot of times, because the law in Florida is that you can ride as a motorist on the roadway or you can ride on the sidewalk with the pedestrians, then that gets kind of confusing. Sometimes we end up with bicyclists going the wrong way on a roadway because they're used to riding on a sidewalk. So we ask them questions about what is their responsibility as a bicyclist. You know, do you signal? Do you ride in the bike lane? You know, what is it that they know and don't know about the rules? And then the other one is focused at pedestrians, and it's basically the same thing. You know, do you as a pedestrian use a crosswalk? Do you understand that if it's not marked but it's an intersection, it still counts as a crosswalk? Those kinds of things. Those surveys we do in person. We actually, when we go out to our events, we actually have the survey on a clipboard, and we hand it to the person. It's a one-page, 10-question, very quick and easy survey for them to answer, and then we usually reward them with like a reflective wristband or Alert Today Alive Tomorrow t-shirt or whatever material we're giving out at that specific event. And lastly, we do observational surveys, and we actually have a team of folks that work on our comprehensive program. They're students that work for the University of South Florida Center for Urban Transportation Research, and they're trained to go out and look at the roadway and tell us what people are doing. Are they commonly seeing that motorists are not yielding to pedestrians and bicyclists? Are they commonly seeing that pedestrians are using the crosswalk or using the signal that's there for them? Are bicyclists riding with or against traffic on the roadway? Those kinds of things, and they mark those things down. And that really gives us a good opportunity to measure what percentage of appropriate response we're getting from those self-reports. Which is the surveys that they actually complete themselves. So we use all of those very effectively, and it really does give us a better understanding of what's going on out there. But again, we would more than be willing to share that with any state.
Great, thank you. One question came back to the campaign, another element of the cost. Do you know the approximate cost of the billboard and banner campaign, or elements of the campaign?
We actually combined the billboard and the television advertisements and the transit together, but I believe our billboards usually cost us between $40,000 and $60,000 per county if we do a good saturation. And it of course depends on how much you want to saturate and where you want to put them. If you're putting digital messages in a more urban area, it might cost more than the vinyl messages in a more rural area. So it really depends on how you use that. And there are only certain companies that really cover some areas, so that also plays a role in it.
Okay. One question came in about involvement of MPOs in this whole process, Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Did you have an involvement on the part of the MPOs, or is this mainly, would this mainly come from the state level, this whole assessment and kind of follow-up process?
Well, the assessment itself came from a state level, but we do have some MPOs and TPOs that actually are implementing pedestrian and bicycle safety programs, and so we certainly do get input from them, and they are part of our partners that we reached out to when we went to our roundtable discussions, and our partners that work with us. For example, in Volusia County, the Volusia County Transportation Planning Organization assisted us, as did the transit agency, in that outreach there when we rolled out in that county. The transit agency, for example, we provided T-shirts to all of their transit drivers, and for the next 3 months, 1 day a week, the transit drivers are actually wearing Alert Today Alive Tomorrow shirts. The Transportation Planning Organization arranged for us to take the show car. We had a show car that was also mocked up like our nationwide car, and they arranged for us to take the show car out to the local universities. So we went out to Embry-Riddle and Bethune-Cookman and Daytona State College and took the show car out so that we could really get that college level involvement, because we are trying to reach that group also.
Great. Okay. Trinda, if a state were to be considering, there probably are some people on the call who are considering maybe pursuing an assessment. If there were any tips that you could give a state who might be thinking about doing something like this, I mean, what sort of things would you recommend they take into consideration, or maybe things that you wish you had known before embarking on this assessment journey?
Well, first of all, I would say that the assessment is probably one of the best things that we did for our program. There's a lot of opportunities there for you. I think the briefing book is probably the most challenging, but NHTSA works very closely with you to make sure that you meet the expectations of the panelists, and they too tell you up front everything that they would like for you to have in that book, so that really is helpful. But I would say if I had it to do again, I would probably reach out to someone who has done one before, get a copy of their materials, even if it's their briefing book or if you want a copy of the assessment report, and just look at it and make yourself familiar with what those expectations are. And I guess Leah can answer this, but probably you could reach out to Leah and she could provide you a list of what NHTSA requires when you make the request, you know, the information that they'll give you pertaining to facilities and briefing material preparation and what have you. But it's not, it sounds like it's really a big, overwhelming process, and when we talk about it, I'm sure we make it seem very, very huge, but it's really not, because you have about 6 months to take it in little pieces. So you don't do everything at the same time. So I would just say, you know, don't let it overwhelm you. Reach out to someone who's done it before. I would be happy to assist you. I know Leah is always happy to assist. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, this is Leah. When an assessment request is made, the headquarters and regional folks will work with the state to provide guidance in terms of exactly what it is that we're going to need. We have, based on the Uniform Guidelines document, we've come up with a big list of questions that is involved with all those different program areas as kind of prompts to get the briefing book going and kind of get the state on their way in investigating and collecting the information. We don't just say, give us all your stuff. We definitely guide you in terms of what it is that we're looking for. And in the pre-assessment site visit, we go through all the logistics. We provide you know, specifics on what is needed for the testimony room, what is needed for the subject matter experts, what is, you know, all the different components, et cetera, down to how the room should be set up. This is a process that's been going on, like I said, since 1988, and we've refined it over time. And it's, you know, it still goes through changes here and there, but we've got it down to a pretty good, a pretty well-oiled machine in terms of how it rolls out. And again, we allow 4 to 6 months. That's not, you know, that's not a rigid timeline. They have been organized in 2 to 3 months, but you know, we want the state to be able to have sufficient time to collect what they need, get everything lined up, get their players in order, and then enough time for our subject matter experts to become familiar with the state that they're going in to assess, and just make it a successful experience.
Great, thank you both. I've got a few more questions coming in, so I'll keep asking those. One question specifically about, you talked about your older road users, 65 and older individuals, both motorists and pedestrians. Can you talk a little bit about specifically how you chose to reach that population with some of the messages in your campaign? Because I think a lot of people are maybe wondering, you know, they know maybe how to reach the younger people, they know how to reach children. What were some of the strategies you used to reach the older adults during your campaign?
Well, it really helps that we have already created an older driver or aging road user strategic highway safety plan. And I think that probably taking that into consideration was our first excellent response to that demographic. And bear with me just a moment as I pull up our Ped Bike strategic plan so that I can give you some of the strategies that we're using there for our aging road users.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Well, what we did find is that, well, of course, aging road users are more fragile than other road users. So that definitely, we have to take that into consideration whenever we're looking at that population. We find that there are more cognitive problems. Through our CarFit program, we find that sometimes their mirrors just aren't adjusted so that they can see what's going on in the roadway around them, which of course impacts our peds and bikes. Sometimes we see that maybe they're not as mobile as they could be. So when they're walking, if they're, in this case, if they're a pedestrian, when they're walking through parking lots, they're more likely to walk closer to the back of a car, which puts them at greater risk. So we looked at what the contributing factors were to crashes involving our aging road users, and keeping that in mind, we developed our recommendations, you know, based on those findings. And I apologize, but I'm still at the point of. We also found that our aging population is not as likely to use social media, and so we had to come up with some consistent, predictable messaging that they would be interested in. So non-traditional, you know, it's gotten to where we use more and more non-traditional messaging, and we find that with our aging road users, using radio or television is a much better way to reach them than maybe where we'd reach our 24-year-olds with social media. Also, we're finding that some of our older citizens in Florida only speak Spanish. They don't speak English. So we had to make sure that we developed our materials in a language that could reach them, and using the things that they're thinking about. For example, if you think about the radio PSA that I played, older people are not as receptive to change. And in that PSA, notice that we addressed changes. There was a bike lane that this person wasn't expecting. There was a no right turn on red implemented in an area, probably because of a pedestrian issue. And so this person was thinking through those things in this PSA. You know, how do we make sure that we get our 65 and up road users to think about or to realize that that might be challenging for them. So those are definitely some things that we did to target them. And then as we're developing our billboards and we're developing any banners or signage, we're keeping in mind that we need to use larger, clear fonts to make sure that they can see it. Helping them understand the types of distractions they may face, because they're not likely to be texting while they're on the road, but there may be other distractions in the car that we're trying to draw their attention to. So just identifying the things that are going on around them and bringing it to their level, I think, was probably our main goal there.
Great, thank you. And one more question came in just related to transit. Does Florida have any rail transit systems, or the local communities have rail systems that were included in the assessment, and or were there any findings specifically related to those transit systems from the assessment, or anything that those transit agencies have sort of been given to sort of follow up on?
In our priority recommendations, there were no transit specific. However, transit was mentioned, you know, that we need to use them as partners. And for example, we do have a rail system. And for example, in Orlando, around our Lynx Central Station, which is where the Sunrail meets transit, we have about 4,000 people per hour coming through there. And so we chose, when we do our Orlando rollout on next Monday, we chose to do that at Lynx Central Station. And we chose to do it there because we feel like it's very important for us to target those people who may not always drive. As you're accessing transit, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I was taught, on a school bus that you get off and you cross where the bus is. And unfortunately, a lot of people do that as adults. They get off the transit bus and they cross where the bus is. So one countermeasure that we're implementing in Orlando with that rollout at the transit station is a campaign. It's a hashtag, where do you cross? And the reason we did that is because we're trying to help them understand the safe place to cross versus the unsafe place to cross. And our team there even did a nice little video with the Alert Today, Alive Tomorrow. They called it the Harlem Shake, but it's a crosswalk, and it's got a crossing guard in the crosswalk. And our PR team, of course, is dressed up in different types of funny attire, crossing through this crosswalk as they're dancing. But we really want to just attract attention to this PSA that we're going to be playing in Link Central Station, so that we can help people see that even though they're doing silly things, they're in the crosswalk and there is a crossing guard, and making sure that people understand, what the right way to cross is and what the wrong way to cross is. So anyway, that was just an example of how we've used our campaign to target both rail users and transit users.
Great, thank you, Trenda. And the last question is for Leah. And Leah, I want to just give you another opportunity to mention what if a state is on the line and wants to pursue an assessment, what is the process for that they can go through to get that started?
If you are not a state highway safety office, then connect with your state highway safety office and discuss pedestrian issues and the benefits that an assessment would bring to the state. If you are a state highway safety office and want to pursue this, then go ahead and contact your NHTSA regional office and discuss the possibility of conducting an assessment, and then you would submit a formal request, and it would kind of take off from there.
Great, thank you. And thanks to both of you for delivering your presentations today. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today for discussion. If we weren't able to respond to your question, though, I hope that you're able to follow up with our presenters. And we do have email addresses up on the screen if you would like to follow up with anyone about today's presentation. Once again, a recording of today's program, as well as a PDF copy of the slide presentation, will be made available at walkinginfo.org/webinars. And if you follow the link on the screen to the Pedestrian Focus webinar series, you'll be able to find our page there. That's where we're going to post all the slides, the resources for the webinar that I mentioned, as well as the archive recording, which will be there in about 1 to 2 weeks. You'll also receive that link in the follow-up email that you'll be getting later today. I just want to remind you all that a very brief survey is going to appear once the webinar has ended. Again, we really appreciate you taking a moment to complete it and let you know what you thought about our presentation today. And thank you again to our speakers, Leah Walton and Trenda McPherson. And thanks to you all for attending today's Pedestrian Focus webinar. Have a great day.